There were moments where we were alone, and you can also seek out like the people who are a little bit ahead of you, a little bit behind you. And so in that way, it's a beautiful analogy to like a journey, right? Yeah. So, hey, where are you? Where are you going to be? How can I get there? So the people who are further ahead, right, can kind of call back and say this and give advice.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of reflection and collaboration as we seek to keep growing as teachers. This podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 97th episode of the Hallway Conversations podcast. My name is Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Friends, we're always looking for topics of conversation and feedback, so please email us or send us a recording of your questions to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. We're always looking for relevant and timely ideas, so please let us know if you have a show topic ruminating around in your head. We want to hear from you. Dave, we have a few friends with us today.
We do.
It's a bit of a full table, and so I wonder if you can take a minute to just introduce our guests.
I would love to. So our first guest is actually our co-host, Abby DeGroat, who's always here with us.
I'm like a host and a guest
today.
today.
You get to do multiple things today. We have two other colleagues, friends who are here with us. Rikki Brons, who teaches in the Spanish department here at Dort.
Hello.
And, Gayle Doornbos, who teaches in theology. And we're so glad to have you guys with us. And this is actually kind of a special episode for us because this is recapping an adventure that the three of you had this summer. And we can't wait to hear the story and share it with our audience. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. So maybe a last spring, or maybe it was even longer ago, I heard rumor of some international trip, travel that the three of you were planning on doing.
Plotting.
Yeah.
Yes.
James
I think it was
Bond
like last fall.
Yeah,
Already.
last fall.
We were
Yeah.
impressed.
Grant submission deadlines.
Yes.
I just remember that it had been in the works for a while, and then one of you shared that you were, the three of you were going to do the Camino, and I had heard of it, and so quickly had to do some research on it. But I'm just wondering if you can maybe just start by, hey, how did this idea come together? Or why the Camino? How did you find each other? I don't know. Abby, maybe I can put you on the spot and start?
Yeah, so it was really Rikki's kind of brainchild, so I'm going to let her tell part of this too. But it had been on my radar before she and I ever talked about it, just as I had followed someone who had gone on it and was interested in it. I turned 40 last year, was interested in some sort of culminating experience around that milestone.
It's a bit of a big deal.
It is. And I'm not so much of a party person, shocker. I know. And was more interested in like let's do something significant where I get to think and contemplate life.
Shocking.
Right? So that was kind of my take on it. And then Rikki actually is the one who brought it to my attention that it was something we could do together. So I'm going to let you tell how that happened.
Sure. As part of my professional development, I attend the Christian Association of World Language Teachers conference every year. I've been a member since 2015, and it's the unicorns, the foreign language teachers of Christian higher ed that get together once a year, and there's shocking not that many of us. Yeah. Anyway, one of our colleagues, Dr. Sharenda Barlar from Wheaton, who teaches Spanish there, has presented over the years taking undergrads on the Camino, on the pilgrimage in Spain that's been a thing since the Middle Ages. Walkways start all over Europe. Actually, my hometown by Berlin has a little sign that says pointing to the Camino, and so I've been familiar with it for a really long time. I'm really familiar with southern Spain through my studies and where I send my undergrads to study to learn Spanish and culture and that kind of immersive learning. But really through Sharenda, I became interested in what is it? What makes people go and literally walk and be alone with their thoughts?
And yeah, it started in the Middle Ages, but it has very much had a resurgence in not only religious circles, but also just like popular culture.
Yes,
so you
absolutely.
see, like if you go on Instagram and like type in the Camino, you will see all kinds of
absolutely.
Why do you think that is? Any of you, like, why is there sort of this resurgence in a in a time when it feels like people are doing stuff like that less, why are people drawn to that more? Now that you've done it, any kind of thoughts on that?
It's a great question.
That is a great question. I think one of the reasons that it's drawing people is that it's a place that provides a context to find meaning in life. And so I think whether or not people are doing it for religious reasons or not, there is something deeply driving people to try to seek this out for some type of meaning. I think there's a kickback against sort of a just more touristy approach to travel. And so pilgrimage is a very different way to think about travel and to think about life. And I think there's also an element of it that's really communal. And so people are really strongly oriented towards not only being alone with their thoughts, but the people that they meet along the way. And I think one of the reasons that it's resurged is there was a very popular movie a while back. It just got re-released called The Way. And it's not about people who are all on spiritual pilgrimage, but it's all about people who are trying to process something in life. And so I think that the Camino has provided a way for people to do that. It's also become a very popular thing, I think, just for people to get in shape. Just kind of like this practical.
And that's in the movie too.
Yeah, that's in the movie too. So you do meet a character in the movie in The Way who's just there to lose some weight or get in shape. And I think that it's become one of those things that's sort of a notch in people's, I've completed this.
Yes,
I've walked
I've done
this full way.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So when Sharonda was talking about it, in our circles, we are trying to send a lot of students abroad. And one of the pieces specifically for summer study abroad is that there are very few scholarships, if any, for that kind of thing. And as we're noticing in our classes, they're becoming more diverse. And we have more and more students that just financially have a really hard time to make study abroad work. And so Sharonda's brainchild is Encounter Travel for a Transformation that basically serves everyone that is a part of it. People that are into continual learning, lifelong learners that want to have a significant experience that is not touristy, but that encompasses cultural learning, language learning, understanding people from other places better, but that can serve in the financial piece of that as you're paying for that trip to pay it forward, so to speak, to fund a scholarship. And so when I heard about that opportunity, both serving me in terms of doing the pilgrimage and understanding what it's like and getting to know a different part of a culture that I've started to be completely in love with and that I teach and that I'm immersed in most of the time. But also this idea, there are lifelong learners amongst my friends that might be interested in doing something like this, and I'm looking at Abby and Gayle right here. This communal piece of what does it look like when we do learning, modeling learning lifelong for our students in our respective areas, but also processing with each other. What we all find is that we love having conversations with each other on other topics, and we find very little time to do that in our academic lives. We are mothers, we are friends, we have lots of other responsibilities in our life and just our workload in general. And so this idea of what would it look like if we took time out, did significant learning like this, that then on the flip side also benefits others. And so I think it's a win-win-win for everybody involved. And so I approached these two and I said, hey, I heard of this opportunity and it would fund scholarships. And on the flip side, we found out later that Sharonda, who had pitched the idea and was in the process of founding the NGO and making sure that scholarship and all the taxes that are connected with it and all the rules that are connected with it so that it might work, was processing this. When I said, hey, I have two friends that would do this with me, she said, oh, I better plan this thing then. And so that was really fun to know. I mean, it really is, when you think about it, providential in how all of the different pieces came together.
Hey, can you just, we have lots of questions, but just from a practical sense, like how many days was it? How far did you walk? Like, just to give people a sense of the Camino.
We were there for 10 days, right?
We were there for 10. The first 5 or 6, I can't remember.
Yep.
We visited some of the cultural sites on the Camino by our cute little van, via our little van and our little van driver, who was wonderful.
Yes.
And Sharinda gave us kind of a bunch of Spanish history, and we learned by seeing and experiencing and going into these cathedrals and visiting these spots. But the whole thing is 720 kilometers.
The French route. So there's lots of different routes.
Yes, the route that we walked.
Which is also the most popular route.
It is.
Yes, in northern Spain.
And it's the French route because it starts in France, actually, over the border in this adorable little town. So we went there, and then we went by van to
Across the Pyrenees.
Yes, through the mountains, which is where the way also starts. Pamplona. What were some of the other places we went?
Burgos, Leon. Yep.
Yeah.
And then
What did a day look like then? Like, so I'm picturing, because I'm just picturing lots of walking.
Yeah.
Like, is there, is it early morning? Yeah.
The second half of our trip was lots of walking.
Yeah.
So that's when we walked all together. We walked around 125 kilometers, which
It's about 70 miles.
yeah, I was going to say for all of our listeners, probably.
Thank you for using
Over the
kilometers.
course of 5 or 6 days.
That was for you, Matt.
Not all at
and
once.
for you, Rikki. Yeah. So a regular day walking would start out very early in the morning, probably around 6.
Yep.
And part of that is so that you get done walking before the heat of the day sets in. But as you leave these towns, you leave with a lot of other pilgrims who are all coming along and coming out of the town you're staying in and then finding their way to the route,
way.
the way. And I've never been on a more well-marked trail.
yes.
There are signs all along the way that point you in the direction that you need to go. And so we usually start out, and this was hard for me because we start out without coffee and without food.
Yes.
But I learned I can do hard things. So we would walk, a couple of miles, and then all along the Camino are these small towns that have cafes. And so you'd stop at a cafe, and we would all gather together, whether or not we had walked the whole, couple of miles together or split up. We would all gather back together at one of the cafes to have breakfast, and then you would get up and you would walk again. And so
then you would have another breakfast.
Yes, you'd have
Café con
breakfast.
leche.
Like hobbits?
It was so wonderful.
And then you would have a snack.
Yeah, that's right. And I was all about the
Inserting yourself.
snacks.
Get out there and refuel.
So you start the day together and you end the day together. So whoever gets to the town or the day's destination, we would say like first coffee or whatever, or would send a picture of here's where I'm sitting and waiting for you guys. So the idea is you do it communally, but it is very much something that everyone has to complete on their own, at their own pace, according to the day's things. If you had blisters, you would fall back. If you didn't, right, you could do certain things.
Yeah.
But the starting together. So the first part of our trip was with a van, as Abby mentioned. We were a group of 7. So we followed Sharinda, or Sharinda followed us, depending on who was leader for the day. And we were joined by a couple, Kelly Jo and her husband, Dean, and Felicia, who was a former student of Sharinda's, who had completed the Camino and who actually decided on the Camino to completely change her career and is now a missionary in Spain. Joined us to help us what that looks like, an experience like that, how profound it can be for someone.
Yeah, and also to kind of talk about what Spanish religious life looks like. So she is a Protestant missionary in a very Catholic country. And so even that piece of it was very interesting in thinking about and talking to her.
And Catholic in terms of cultural Catholicism, which very different practices than what we would observe here in the United States by practicing Catholics. And so this idea of learning from others who live amongst the people who have experience with that, having certain observations and saying, hey, I see a lot of people that have, celebrate their Saints' Day or something like that, and then being able to reflect that back. What does that mean? Is it a piece of the culture that people just by tradition, do they prescribe to the faith, and how do they live that? Are they open to other ideas? And so that wrestling and that observing and taking the judging piece out of it, but really, what's my interpretation of this? What's the actual thing that I can observe of the culture? And then how do I interpret that without bringing too much of my own cultural lens or perspective into that? And that practice on a day-to-day basis I think is a huge part of why we wanted to be engaged in this type of travel.
So when you're out on the Camino, I mean, you're encountering a whole bunch of people from different backgrounds, from different experiences. Could you share a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, I think one thing that was true is that because we were traveling as a group, we probably didn't meet as many people as you might if you start on your own. And we also walked the last 125K rather than starting at the beginning. And I think if you start at the beginning and walk the whole way, you end up with kind of a Camino family.
Yes.
But we did meet one very interesting individual
And kept meeting him.
Yeah, because you sort of are on the same pace.
Accordion style. You walk ahead and then you catch up with each other.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I could say about him is that he was
Michael from Canada.
Yes.
Shout out if you hear this.
Yes. Well, I don't know if he's going to want the shout out now, because I would describe him as a very restless soul.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's somebody who has done multiple very long walks and always seemed to be searching for something. And that was very clear. He gave off a kind of odd vibe, which is why we laugh a little bit when we talk about him, sort of like trying to engage but also trying to stay away a little bit. But yeah, we met him multiple times, and just sort of this sense of he was there searching for something, but he didn't know what he was really looking for.
Interesting.
And he would talk to us and talk to people along the way. And he was probably one of the primary people that we met every once in a while, like even walking through a town, and he'd just be walking past and come join us for gelato.
Yeah.
Which is also part of our daily practice.
Ice cream.
Formational.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's
yes.
deeply formational.
Ate our way across the countryside.
Yes.
What's interesting for our encounter with Michael is that it was really our first real walking day. A significant and very emotional and spiritual day for all of us, I think. Part of the Camino on the French route is that you carry a rock with you. And the rock symbolizes something from home, a burden that you're carrying, whether that's literal or it's figurative. But this reminder of we are all carrying something with us. And on this first day for us, which is kind of 2/3 into the Camino.
Right, for everyone else who's walking the whole thing.
Yep. You walk up into the mountains onto a spot where you see a big pillar out of wood, and on top of it is a cross. And at the foot of that cross are hundreds or thousands of little stones. Representation of pilgrims that have gone before you, saints that have carried something with them, and literally laid it down at the cross. And each one of us individually kind of decided what that would be for us for this Camino.
And we took it along knowing we would do this, so we all took a rock from home, in our backpacks. Took it along.
And having that in mind as we're walking, and so that laying down, even though we were mentally thinking about it and prepared to do this, and it's nothing new in our faith that we are called to lay down our burdens at the foot of the cross. But this physical exercise of doing it is actually, at least for me, was emotionally quite overwhelming because it is so visible, so you feel visceral in what you're doing there. We paused as a group at that point. Everybody took their time to do that, and we sat down by a little hut that was next to it, sat down in the shade, and then our group started. We sang some hymns, we did prayers, communal and individually, until everybody was ready to get up and walk that first significant piece in the mountains. Beautiful views, really difficult terrain, walking downhill for about 2 hours on not solid footing. So hard on your feet, hard on spiritually thinking about what you just did and laying it down. And so we come to the restaurant or that first bar that we were going to meet at, and Gayle is already there. And Gayle, you met Michael first.
I did, yeah. And I think it was very interesting because I was a little bit ahead of the group, just sort of hiking and processing, and then I met Michael, and he was like, "Oh man, I just saw this really weird group back there singing." So he didn't know that I was a part of it.
Yes. It was us. Yes. And the clean boots, which...
Yeah, he also mocked us because he's like, "Oh yeah, they were singing and they had clean shoes, so they definitely have not been walking the whole Camino." So that became a joke amongst all of us. But it was an interesting contrast to sort of, somebody who was deeply seeking but couldn't see that there was our group in the midst of what we were doing as we found our way to the cross. And so that contrast was really strong and a very fascinating thing to kind of happen on that day. Yeah.
I'm really, as you're all talking, I'm really struck the balance between you're doing this individually, but you're also doing this communally. Like I'm even thinking about that as you've carried this specific rock to this specific place, and yet there's thousands of other rocks. And so can you just talk a little bit about that, about the importance of like, hey, you're there as part of a group and there's something important about that, and yet you're there also as individuals. And the reason just to frame that a bit is I'm thinking about teachers who are listening to this. We're around so many people, and it can be such a lonely position at times. And it's this idea of like how the importance of caring for yourself, and like, and yet also, why is it important to remember that you're part of something bigger, I guess? I don't know. Abby, can you speak to that? Like, how did you...
That's a good framing of it. Yeah, I think both of those things are true. So there were moments where we were alone, and you can also seek out like the people who are a little bit ahead of you, a little bit behind you. And so in that way, it's a beautiful analogy to like a journey, right? Yeah. So, hey, where are you? Where are you going to be? How can I get there? So the people who are further ahead, right, can kind of call back and say this and give advice. Hey, avoid this. I took this route, not this one, because there were some times when you could like choose either to go like straight up or right like through. So there were forks in the road, and you could call back to people or you could ask ahead. And also just, I think the processing is one of the most important parts, right? So I always tell my students, like, reflection is over half of the learning, right? Yes. You learn by reflecting on the doing, not the doing itself. And so I think that was a huge part of you, even when you did the walking yourself and in community, we still would intentionally gather together. At our destination, we often finish the day with lunch, but it's like a 2:00 meal in Spain. The Spain schedule is really quite nice, actually.
Yes,
so the big meal of the day. Yeah.
Thank you for not saying weird.
Quite nice.
Wonderful.
Quite nice.
Yeah.
I would take it. Yeah. So the big meal of the day is at 2:00. So we would process together after our day of walking was over, and then we'd have some alone time again, and then we'd gather together for like an evening kind of snack charcuterie situation, often, which was also also delightful. And we'd start our morning together in prayer, right, and reflection. And so I think having time to do the thing yourself, but more importantly, thinking about that as a whole.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to intentionally make this a 2-part episode. So, hey, if you enjoyed this first part of the conversation, make sure you come back for our next episode in a couple of weeks here, okay?
So in that vein, friends, we know your time is valuable and want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation, whether it's this day, this week, this month, or this school year. We hope the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. And we want to send you from here with this blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good week.
This podcast was literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Hey, we have a favor to ask of you. Would you be willing to rate this podcast or write a review in your podcast app? Or if you found this conversation interesting or helpful, would you consider sharing it on your social media? Those things really do help podcasters out, and we would be so, so grateful. Thanks for listening, friends.
And put your pants back on. No shorts.
I hope I got that.
Okay, that's